You are looking at a garden producing fresh vegetables in the dead of winter, without a single watt of electricity. The Amish have been doing it for centuries. The answer changed everything I knew, because this method uses not one secret, but two. No heated greenhouse, no electric bills. And in 2018, a Wisconsin farm proved it with a thermometer reading of -18 degrees. Stay with me, because this works on a tiny patch with nothing but plastic and sunlight. This is a cold frame. This is a low tunnel. Together, they let you harvest greens in a blizzard. The Amish have used them for generations, but the science is so simple a Wisconsin farm pulled off fresh lettuce at -18. The real question isn't whether it works, it's why we ever stopped. Why we ever stopped. It's a question that took me to a library basement in Vermont, to a farm in Lancaster County, and to a man named Eliot Coleman, because the answer is buried in 3 generations of deliberate silence and one government pamphlet from 1954 that almost nobody has opened since. But before I show you that pamphlet, you need to see what the Amish already know, and what a Wisconsin farmer proved on the coldest morning of his life. Eliot Coleman was a young back-to-the-lander in Maine in the 1970s. He had a degree in biology, and a question no one else was asking. Why does fresh food have to travel 3,000 miles in January? He started experimenting with cold frames, then low tunnels, then unheated greenhouses. He refused to use electricity or fossil fuels, and by the mid-80s, he was harvesting salad greens every single week of the year on a farm buried under 4 feet of snow. The French had been doing it for centuries, the Dutch, the Amish. But Coleman had something they didn't, a platform. He wrote a book, then another. Then an entire movement was born around the idea that a winter garden was not a novelty. It was a right. But long before Coleman put a pen to paper, the Amish in Lancaster County had already solved the problem with 2 sheets of glass and a box of wood. They didn't call it season extension. They didn't patent it. They just built it. And in November, they would plant spinach and mache and claytonia and walk away. By January, when the rest of us were buying wilted lettuce in plastic bags, they were lifting a lid and cutting greens that had been alive an hour before. Then, in 2018, a small market farm in western Wisconsin put the system to the ultimate test. The temperature dropped to -18 degrees Fahrenheit. Not wind chill, actual air temperature. The farmer went out that morning expecting to find frozen slime. Instead, he pulled back a single layer of row cover, then a layer of plastic, and underneath it, lettuce. Not just alive, but harvestable, crisp enough to sell at the farmer's market the next day. That image went viral among growers. It was the proof that the natural insulation of the earth, trapped by nothing more than plastic and air, could keep a living crop warm in conditions that would kill a person in minutes. Here is the science. The soil at a depth of 4 feet stays around 50 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. A cold frame captures that rising heat like a blanket. Add a low tunnel inside it, and you create a cocoon of still air that can be 7 to 20 degrees warmer than the outside air. Snow is an insulator. Plants like spinach and kale concentrate sugars as an antifreeze. The whole thing is a perfect biological machine that asks for nothing but sunlight and the occasional cloud of your breath when you open the lid to vent on a sunny day. But hold on, because the most important part isn't how to build one. It's a document I found in a dusty library archive that explains exactly why your grandfather didn't teach you this. And that document connects directly to a decision made in a boardroom in 1954. The document sits in a cardboard box in the basement of the National Agricultural Library in Beltsville, Maryland. Its cover is faded. The title is a single sentence: The Modern Farm Family and Its Food Supply. It was published in 1954 by the United States Department of Agriculture, and on page 4, in plain government prose, it tells American families that home gardening in winter is a waste of their time and a waste of their land. The authors calculated that it cost a farmer more to grow a head of lettuce in December than to buy one shipped from California. They recommended that every small family farm abandon season extension and instead specialize in one cash crop and shop for the rest at a supermarket. What the pamphlet didn't mention was who had requested it: a consortium of supermarket chains. The National Association of Food Chains had been lobbying the USDA for exactly that language. In a boardroom at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, in March of that same year, the presidents of A&P, Kroger, and Safeway, along with representatives from the Southern Pacific Railroad and the Teamsters Union, sat down with USDA officials. They wanted year-round truckloads of produce moving from California and Florida to every town in America, and they knew they could not sell a head of iceberg lettuce to a family that was pulling buttery mache from under a cold frame in their own backyard. So the decision was made: bury the knowledge, reframe the school curriculum, rewrite the county extension bulletins. Within 3 years, the USDA stopped teaching cold frame construction and started teaching deep freeze canning. They called it modern food storage. They told your grandfather that the old ways were backwards. But the Amish did not read that pamphlet. They did not read any pamphlet. They had their own schoolhouses, their own teachers, their own way of measuring time. When the local extension agent in Lancaster County stopped distributing plans for wooden sashes and glass beds, the Amish just went to their barns and built more. They had designed their own cold frames to make the most of the low winter sun. The back wall 12 inches tall, sloping to 8 inches at the front, oriented true south, bedded with fresh horse manure under a foot of soil to generate a tiny breath of heat. They knew what spinach wanted when the temperature fell below freezing. They knew that kale sweetened after a frost because the plant converted starches into sugars to lower its freezing point. They knew that mache, the delicate rosette the French call doucette, could be buried under snow for 2 weeks and emerge greener than before. That knowledge was never lost. It just went silent for 70 years, while the rest of us forgot it existed. Meanwhile, in 20 years, the number of American seed companies dropped from over 300 to fewer than 50. Varieties bred specifically for winter hardiness: the old Bloomsdale long-standing spinach, the winter density lettuce, the Merveille des Quatre Saisons butterhead, were nearly wiped out of the catalogs. Seed Savers Exchange in Iowa spent the 1970s hunting down the last packets of these seeds in Amish gardens and Mennonite farmsteads that had never stopped growing them. It was the horticultural equivalent of burning a library and assuming the copies in the private collection would smolder into ash too. But the Amish didn't burn. By the time Eliot Coleman started building his unheated tunnels in Maine, the manual for winter gardening in America had been blanked out for a generation. He had to reverse engineer it from old French market gardening books, and a handful of living farmers in Vermont and Pennsylvania who still remembered their grandfather's methods. The core turned out to be brutally simple: capture the Earth's geothermal heat under a transparent shield. Let the plants do the rest. No electric cables, no fossil fuel heaters, no magic. Just the 50-degree soil rising upward, trapped by glass or plastic, and a crop that has evolved for 4,000 years to survive the cold. And when that Wisconsin farmer came out on the morning of January 30th, 2018, and lifted his low tunnel cover to find his Salanova lettuce crisp and market ready at 18 below zero. He did not shout, "Eureka!" He said a quiet four-letter word under his breath, went inside, posted a photo, and it spread like a secret that no one could believe was still allowed. Because the deeper truth is that the boardroom's decision in 1954 wasn't just about lettuce. It was about control. And that brings me to a wooden box in my own backyard and the $3 plastic panel that, right now, is keeping spinach alive in 12-degree weather, while the grocery stores are selling greens that have traveled farther than I have in the last month. That spinach is the descendant of seeds that have been saved by Amish families since the 1700s. Seeds the USDA told your grandfather were obsolete. But the boardroom in 1954 didn't just kill the instructions. They tried to kill the seeds themselves. And the story of how they almost succeeded is the reason you've never tasted a true January lettuce. 7 years after that pamphlet, the Supreme Court handed down a ruling that barely made the papers. A German chemical company was allowed to patent a rose. That precedent opened the floodgates. By 1980, seed companies could patent sexually reproduced plants, any hybrid they created. The moment a variety became proprietary, it became illegal for you to save its seed, illegal for you to breed from it. The old, open, pollinated varieties that had survived winters in New England since the Puritans were no longer profitable to sell. You buy a packet once, you save your own seed forever. That was the problem. So the catalogs quietly dropped them. The USDA's own seed banks stopped maintaining the winter density lettuce, the Bloomsdale long-standing spinach, the Rouge de Vire, romaine that had fed Paris market gardeners through the snow since Napoleon. By 1990, genetic tests showed that over 80% of the winter hardy vegetable varieties listed in a 1903 U.S. seed catalog had simply vanished from commercial availability. Not extinct yet, but gone from the shelves. The Amish didn't need the shelves. In a leather pouch in a barn in East Hempfield Township, an Amish grandmother kept the corn salad verte de Cambrai that her family had brought from Alsace in 1740. In a mason jar in a root cellar in Bart Township, a farmer named Reuben still held the January King cabbage, the one the French call Trou de Milan, cold sweetened, purple veined, almost impossible to kill. Those seeds were never catalogued, never patented, never declared obsolete. They just grew, silently, every fall, tucked into cold frames made of salvaged windows and scrap lumber. While the rest of America was learning to buy bagged salad, the Amish were still cutting it fresh in a blizzard. And here is the detail that makes you angry. The supermarket chains that demanded the 1954 pamphlet now sell winter greens in plastic clamshells for $5 a bag. They've rebranded the same old iceberg as seasonal field greens and called it a premium product. The same consortium that killed your grandfather's cold frame now profits from your ignorance that you could be growing them for pennies. Nothing changed except the packaging. But the counterattack began in the most unlikely place, a small farm in Harborside, Maine, where Elliot Coleman refused to follow the rules, and a network of Amish families who never knew there were rules to break. Coleman's books sold millions. The internet gave away his plans for free. And in the last 10 years, a quiet army of backyard growers has built cold frames out of reclaimed windows, low tunnels from PVC pipe and greenhouse plastic, and they have discovered that the old varieties still exist if you know where to look. Now, before I show you the exact build that costs less than a dinner out, I need to point you somewhere, because the question I get more than any other is, what seeds? When do I plant them? How do I keep them alive? When the temperature hits -20, I put together a complete winter planting guide, exact varieties, planting dates by hardiness zone, and the 3 crops that will feed you every single week from December through March. The link is in the description. But stay here, because what I am about to show you is the $24 cold frame that changed my life, and the single mistake that will freeze every plant you own on the first 10-degree night. Here is what I built. A box made from 2 untreated pine boards, 12 inches tall in back, 8 inches in front, screwed together and set on bare ground in a south-facing patch of dirt. The lid is an old storm window I found on Craigslist for $15. The hinges cost $4 at the hardware store. The whole thing, $24 and an hour of work. I filled the bottom with 4 inches of finished compost, laid a sheet of black plastic mulch over the soil to absorb every photon of sunlight, and planted spinach, mache, and claytonia on September 1st. By November 15th, the spinach was the size of dinner plates. By January 10th, with an outside temperature of 12 degrees, the inside of that box was holding at 38. The plants stopped growing, but they didn't die. They just sat there, suspended, waiting. When the sun returned in February, they woke up and doubled in size before the spring equinox. I harvested more than 30 pounds of greens from a 4-foot by 4-foot box between November and March. No electricity, no heater, no bill, but the single mistake that will freeze every plant you own on the first 10-degree night is this: a half-inch gap, a lid that doesn't seal tight, a warped board that lets a breath of cold air slide in, a forgotten latch that swings open in the wind. The 50-degree soil heat rises. It collects under the glass, and if there's even a crack, it bleeds out into the night sky. That half-inch gap turns your cold frame into an open freezer. The plants don't just go dormant, they freeze solid, cell walls rupturing, and the next morning you have a box of black slime. I did it my first year. Every winter grower has done it once. The Amish measure their lids with a cabinet maker's precision, and they close them at dusk like a ritual. Do that, and the box works without you ever touching a thermostat. Now, here's the planting calendar that keeps food on your table every week from December through March. I am going to give it to you clean and simple. In late August, direct seed spinach, mache, and claytonia. Spinach is the workhorse. It yields all winter in the frame, leaf by leaf. Mache is the insurance policy. It can freeze solid, thaw out, and regrow without a spot of damage. Claytonia, also called miner's lettuce, fills every gap in the frame with tender heart-shaped leaves and will reseed itself forever. That's your core 3. In late September, add a row of scallions and a row of carrots. The carrots will not grow much above ground in the dark of December, but underground they are turning starch into sugar. By January, a carrot pulled from that cold soil tastes like candy. In early October, cut the scallions down to 2 inches to force new growth, and harvest them as you need them all winter. When the temperature dips below -10 Fahrenheit, throw an old blanket over the cold frame overnight and pull it off in the morning. That one extra layer gives you another 8 degrees of protection. I've tested it a dozen times. By Thanksgiving, the grocery store across town is selling bagged spinach from 2,000 miles away for $4.99 a pound. I walk 40 feet from my back door and cut a pound of mine for free. That is the math that the boardroom in 1954 tried to erase. And it's the math the Amish never forgot. Which brings me to the seeds themselves. The varieties I plant are all open-pollinated, all heirloom. all saved from the year before. The spinach is Bloomsdale long-standing, a 19th century variety that a Mennonite grower in Lancaster County kept alive through 80 years when the seed catalogues dropped it. The mache is Verte de Cambrai, an Amish strain that has never been commercialized. The carrots are Rouge de Vert, the old Parisian winter carrot that tastes sweeter than any orange stick you've ever pulled from a bag. These seeds are not in most catalogs, but they're not hidden either. They're just not advertised. I've put the sources in the link in the description. You don't need land. You don't need money. You need a box, a piece of glass, and a packet of seeds that has been quietly passed down through families who refused to believe that modern meant better. The Amish have been proving the USDA wrong since 1954. Elliot Coleman spent 40 years giving us the manual. The Wisconsin farmer who pulled lettuce at 18 below proved the ceiling doesn't exist. Now it's your turn. Now it's your turn. Because the boardroom in 1954 expected you to stay blind. The seed catalogs expected you to forget. But you just built a cold frame in your mind and planted it with varieties that have outlasted every empire. So I want to hear from you. If you could put a 4x4 cold frame anywhere on your property tomorrow, what crop would you grow first? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and your answers shape what we cover next. Hit subscribe, not for me, for what comes next. Because in the next video, I'm going to show you the Amish root cellar that keeps carrots, cabbage, and potatoes fresh for 9 months without a single watt of electricity. And the industry it replaces is even bigger than the one that tried to kill winter gardening.